I had always gone to my son's house when he called. It was more convenient for everyone, as he used to say. But that morning, something tugged sharply at my heart. Without warning him, I got in the car. The road was quiet, and all I could think about was, it's been too long since I've seen Jake. I opened the door with my spare key and was instantly hit by the smell of bleach. From the kitchen came the sound of a rag scraping against tile and soft, uneven sobs. I froze. There, wearing an apron far too big for him, stood my grandson. A 6-year-old boy, bent so low his small back looked fragile, almost breakable. He was scrubbing the floor with a sponge as if his life depended on it. His elbows shook, his hair clung damply to his forehead, and his lips kept moving, either counting quietly or asking forgiveness from someone who wasn't there. In the living room just a few steps away, Michael and Trevor, Candace's sons from her first marriage, do bonsken in wicker o bo do o barspral o all bo busrolled on the couch, clutching game controllers and laughing at something on the TV. Candace, in a new silk robe, lounged in an armchair with a cup of coffee, joking with them. Not one of them glanced toward Jake. I stepped forward, and the floor creaked under my shoe. Jake flinched and turned, but in his eyes I saw no joy, no relief, only fear, the kind of fear that sends a chill down your spine. "Grandma?" He straightened, but his gaze dropped immediately, as if looking at me for too long might get him in trouble. "Jake, honey, what are you doing?" I tried to keep my voice calm, but it trembled. "The floor's dirty," he mumbled. From the living room came Candace's lazy voice. "Finish it properly, or you're not getting lunch." Michael burst out laughing. Trevor joined in. "Yeah, kid, you'll miss your little kid's feast." I felt something rise inside me, hot, fierce, and ready to sweep through the whole house. I stepped into the kitchen, my heels knocking against the floor with a heavy sound. Jake backed away, clutching the filthy rag to his chest like a shield. "Candace!" I called, my voice sharper than I'd expected. She appeared in the doorway, perfectly made up, hair in flawless curls, eyes cold. "Oh, Mary, what a surprise," she said, as if we'd bumped into each other at the supermarket, not in the house where a 6-year-old was scrubbing floors on his knees. "Why is Jake working while your boys sit around?" I folded my arms, my anger already boiling. "Working?" She gave a fake little laugh. "He's learning responsibility. Michael and Trevor already did their chores." I glanced toward the living room. On the coffee table sat a pile of empty glasses, chip crumbs, and a couple of sticky plates. Those chores apparently didn't include cleaning up after themselves. "Jake, come here," I called gently, but he didn't move. I realized he was afraid to disobey. "He needs to finish," Candace said pointedly, "or it'll be like last time." "Last time?" I narrowed my eyes. She shrugged, unfazed. "He skipped dinner. We have to teach him somehow." From the living room, Tom appeared. His hair was mussed, a beer mug in his hand. He looked me over quickly. "Mom, don't start. He needs to learn discipline." "Discipline?" My voice rose. "This isn't discipline, Tom. It's cruelty." Jake, standing between us, suddenly whispered, almost to himself, "I'll do it. Just don't." Those quiet words hit me harder than any scream. In that instant, I knew. If I walked away now, I wouldn't just lose my grandson physically. I'd lose his trust that someone in this world would protect him. When I think about the moment things started to fall apart, my mind always goes back to that rainy day when Tom called and said, "Mom, Linda's gone." I remember the mug slipping from my hands. Linda, my daughter-in-law, had been such a bright soul. She loved Jake in a way that was impossible to miss, even for me, though we didn't see each other often. She was only 32, and it all ended in an instant, a highway accident. Tom broke after that. He became short-tempered, withdrawn, refused any kind of help. And Jake, he just sat at the window waiting for his mom. He didn't cry, and that was somehow worse than if he had. 6 months later, Candace arrived in our lives. Too flashy, too self-assured, too quick to claim control. I could tell from the start, she was more interested in the fact that Tom had a stable job and a home than in the wound he still carried. Candace had 2 sons already, Michael and Trevor. I tried to be kind, but I could see her creating a pecking order. Her boys were the heirs, and Jake was just the extra kid who needed to adapt. A year after they married, Tom called me again. "Mom, we need a bigger house. The kids are growing. We found the perfect one, but the bank won't give us the loan." I remember sitting in my kitchen, looking at old photos of little Tom, grinning ear to ear. Helping him felt like my duty. I took on the financing myself. The house went under my name, though I chose not to tell him. I thought he'd be proud, believing he'd done it on his own. It was a mistake. A big one. From then on, things went downhill. Tom grew distant. His tone turned cold, as though we were business partners, not mother and son. Candace took full control of the household. Sometimes I'd drop by without warning and almost always see the same scene. Jake cleaning up Michael and Trevor's toys, washing dishes, wiping counters. "He's just helping," Candace would say with her sugary smile, but I knew it wasn't help. It was a chore, forced on a child who was afraid to say no. I kept quiet. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I was afraid of losing my son if I took too strong a stand for my grandson. I excused Tom in my mind. He's tired, he's grieving, he doesn't notice. I told myself Candace was just strict, not cruel. 4 years passed. 4 years of biting my tongue, swallowing my anger, agreeing to unfairness, all for the sake of keeping the family together. But now, watching Jake bent over that filthy floor, I saw the truth. I hadn't been saving a family. I'd been protecting an illusion. And that illusion had died long ago, along with my naive belief that blood automatically meant love and protection. Something shifted inside me. I suddenly realized my mistake was letting this woman and my son decide my grandson's fate, when I was the one who'd given them the roof over their heads. And that was the last straw. Jake always seemed as fragile as a young sapling that could break in the first strong wind. He spoke softly, almost whispering as if every word might earn him punishment. When I asked him a question, he'd glance first at Candace or Tom, waiting for their reaction before answering. Even his laughter was restrained, as if too much joy might be dangerous. His eyes, the same clear blue as his mother's, but now filled more with wariness than curiosity. He'd press his lips together whenever an adult raised their voice, even if it wasn't directed at him. He seemed to try to disappear into the background, always in some corner, always busy, just to avoid getting in the way. Michael and Trevor were the complete opposite. At 10 and 8, they acted like the house was their personal playground. Backpacks tossed in the hallway, sneakers abandoned in the middle of the floor, TV blaring no matter who else was around. And they never picked up after themselves. When I saw Jake cleaning up their spilled juice or picking up their socks, something twisted inside me. But Candace called it sharing responsibilities. Strangely, those responsibilities always fell on Jake, while her boys enjoyed the privileges. Michael and Trevor were spoiled rotten. They got new gadgets constantly, and if they didn't get what they wanted immediately, they'd throw tantrums. Tantrums Tom would solve with a quick trip to the store. They could speak rudely to adults, and no one would correct them. Candace called it confidence. In truth, it was entitlement. "My boys know what they want, and they always get it," she'd say, looking at me in a way that seemed to add, "unlike your grandson." Her attitude toward me was its own story. She never called me Mrs. Anderson or Mary. Just she when speaking to Tom. "She's callin' again. She's askin' about Jake." In person, she smiled without warmth, like a store clerk serving a customer she didn't like, and when we were alone, she'd slip in little jabs. "You probably don't understand how hard it is to raise 3 kids, especially when one isn't yours and constantly needs attention." I tried to diffuse those moments for Tom's sake, but with each visit, it became clearer. In this house, there were rules. Rules where Jake was at the bottom, and I was the unwanted guest interfering in their perfect life. It was like a glossy magazine spread, spacious living room, sparkling kitchen, manicured yard, but behind it was rot, coldness, neglect, and a division between us and them. Sometimes I'd catch Jake's gaze. He never spoke, but his eyes silently said, "Grandma, please don't go." One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table watching Jake stand on tiptoe, carefully placing half a sandwich, an apple, and a cookie into a lunchbox. His movements were slow and deliberate, as if he were arranging something fragile for display. Twice, he adjusted the napkin inside, making sure the apple sat just right. From the living room, the TV blared. Michael and Trevor shouted and laughed over their video game. Tom sat with a newspaper, paying no attention to the noise or to the fact that his son was making lunch for himself. Candace walked in, her heels tapping sharply against the floor. She wore a bright red dress and heavy gold earrings that swayed with each step. She stopped behind Jake, arms crossed, watching him for a moment. "What's this?" Her voice was sharp. "Lunch, for school," he murmured without turning. "Lunch?" she echoed, mocking his tone. "You put a cookie in again?" I thought." "You thought?" The contempt in her voice made even me flinch. "You can't do anything right, Jake. Absolutely nothing." Before I could move, she grabbed the lunchbox from his hands and dumped its contents into the trash. "That's why your mother's gone," she said coldly, like stating a fact. She couldn't bear having such a useless son. The words hung in the air like poison. Jake froze, his small fists clenched. His shoulders trembled, but he didn't cry. He just stood there, like a trapped animal that knew there was no escape. Something inside me snapped. Until that moment, I had tried to hold back, telling myself not to cause a scene, to wait for the right time, to speak to Tom in private. But none of that mattered now. "What did you just say?" My voice was low and steady enough that even Candace paused. "Oh, Mary, don't start," she waved a hand. "He needs to know the truth. You baby him too much." "That's not the truth," I said, standing, heat flooding through me. "And even if it were, you have no right to say that to a child." "He's not a child," Candace snapped. "He's a lazy brat who needs to learn to work." "He's 6 years old," I shouted. 6. The TV in the living room went silent. Michael and Trevor appeared in the doorway, Tom behind them. "What's going on?" Tom asked lazily, but then he saw my face and frowned. "Mom, what's going on?" I turned on him. "Your wife just told your son his mother died because of him, and you're standing there doing nothing?" Tom hesitated, glancing between Candace and me. "Mom, you're exaggerating." "Exaggerating?" I almost laughed, but it came out bitter. "I saw her throw his lunch in the trash. I heard her call him useless." Jake stood there, eyes fixed on the floor, small fingers twisting the edge of his apron. "Jake," I said softly, "is it true she said that?" He nodded slowly without looking up, And in that moment, I knew if I walked away without changing anything, he would keep living in this hell for years. That's it, I straightened. Enough. Mom, Tom began, but I held up my hand. Tom, be quiet. I looked directly into the eyes of the boy I'd once carried in my arms. You let this woman poison your child. You chose convenience over protection, and I will not stand by anymore. I took Jake's hand. His small palm was cold and clammy, but he clung to me tightly. We're leaving, I said. It wasn't a question. The kitchen fell silent. Even the hum of the TV in the living room seemed to fade. Tom stared at me like he didn't recognize me. Candace gripped the back of a chair as if it were a weapon. Jake pressed against me, as though I were the last safe place left in the world. I took a breath and spoke quietly, but clearly enough for every person in the room to hear. Tom, you know the house you live in belongs to me, right? He blinked. What? You heard me. The mortgage has been in my name since day one. That's not true, Candace cut in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. We signed the papers together. Yes, I nodded. Tom signed as a guarantor, but I am the legal owner and the one paying for it. I have the documents. Tom took a step toward me, trying to regain control. Mom, why are you bringing this up now? Because from this moment, everything changes. I pulled my phone from my bag. I'm done paying for a roof over the heads of people who abuse my grandson. Candace smirked, but I caught a flicker of unease in her eyes. This is blackmail, Mary. No, Candace, this is accountability, I said, dialing the bank. Tom moved quickly. Mom, put the phone down. We can talk about this. The time for talking is over, Tom. I turned toward the window, waiting for the line to connect. Hello, this is Mary Anderson, I said when the manager answered. I want to terminate the financing for the property at... I gave the address. Ma'am, are you certain? Once the process begins, there's no going back, the polite voice on the other end asked. Absolutely certain, I replied, looking straight at Candace. The house will be back in the bank's hands. In that case, the occupants will have 30 days to vacate, he confirmed. I'll send you the documents to sign. Thank you. I'll look for them in my email. I ended the call. You've ruined us, Candace shrieked. We have kids. Yes, I said. One of them is my grandson, and unlike you, I intend to take care of him. Tom stood with his eyes down. Mom, we could have worked something out. Worked something out? I raised an eyebrow. That would mean owning up to what you've done and changing. Instead, you've let Jake be humiliated and overworked while I paid for your light and water. No, Tom, it's over. I took Jake's hand again. We're leaving. Now. You can't just take him, Tom shouted, but his voice lacked conviction. I can, I said firmly, because he's in danger, and I have witnesses, recordings, proof. Try to stop me, and you'll only speed things up. We walked past Candace. I felt her hand tense on the back of the chair, as if she wanted to stop me, but she didn't move. Michael and Trevor peeked from the living room, confusion on their faces. For the first time, they realized their mother wasn't invincible. Jake gripped my hand so tightly my fingers went white. He didn't say a word, but each step he took beside me was a silent plea. Don't let go. At the front door, I turned back. You have 30 days. Use them wisely. I opened the door, and fresh air rushed in, washing away the stale, toxic smell of that house. We stepped out onto the porch, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. In the car, Jake asked quietly, Grandma, are we going to live with you now? Yes, sweetheart, I said, smoothing his hair, and no one will ever yell at you or make you do what's too much for you again. He nodded and turned to the window. After a few minutes, I caught his reflection. He was smiling. Not a wide, carefree smile, but the first spark of hope I'd seen in his eyes in years. The next day, I sat in my own living room, watching Jake quietly leaf through old photo albums. He wasn't silent in that frozen, anxious way I'd seen before. Now it was the kind of silence that comes from peace. For the first time in a long while, he was simply resting. The phone rang. It was Isaiah Green, an old friend and my lawyer, a man I trusted like family. "Mary, I've got everything ready." His voice was steady. "If you're willing, we can hold the press conference today. The sooner we make this public, the harder it will be for them to twist the story." I closed the album. Today. By evening, we were in a modest conference room at a local hotel. Reporters were already waiting. Local TV crews, bloggers, even a couple from the next state over. As I walked in, camera flashes momentarily blinded me. I knew there was no turning back. Isaiah spoke first, briefly introducing me and explaining that we had evidence showing my grandson had been subjected to psychological abuse in my son's household. Then it was my turn. My voice trembled inside me, but outwardly it came out firm. "My name is Mary Anderson. I am the grandmother of 6-year-old Jake. I am not here to shame anyone, but to protect a child I love." On the screen behind me, Isaiah played the first video clip, the moment Candace dumped Jake's lunch into the trash and said, "You can't do anything right. That's why your mother's gone." The room went silent. Some reporters stopped taking notes and just stared, as if they couldn't believe an adult could say that to a child. Then came the photos, Jake's small hands raw from cleaning chemicals, footage from a neighbor's security camera showing him dragging a heavy hose across the yard under the blazing sun while Michael and Trevor splashed in the pool. "This isn't teaching responsibility," I said. "This is forced labor and humiliation endured by a 6-year-old." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Then we played an audio statement from Mrs. Watson, the neighbor who'd overheard Candace shouting at Jake, blaming him for his mother's death. Her voice shook, but every word was as sharp as a blade. A young reporter in the front row asked, "Why did you stay silent for so long?" "Because I was a fool," I answered honestly. "I was afraid of losing my son. I thought I was protecting the family, but a family that abuses a child isn't a family." The next question came quickly. "Did you stop financing the house as an act of revenge?" "No." I looked straight into the nearest camera. "I stopped paying for a place where my grandson was treated like a servant. My conscience wouldn't allow me to keep doing it." And then, from the back of the room, a voice spoke. "She's telling the truth." Heads turned. Tom stepped forward from the shadows. His voice shook, but his words were clear. "I let this happen. I'm not making excuses. I failed my son." Cameras clicked like gunfire. Reporters scribbled frantically. "I don't know if Jake will ever forgive me," Tom went on, "but I'm done staying silent." Candace wasn't there, but I knew she was watching. And now she had no chance to convince anyone it was all lies. When the conference ended, reporters swarmed with questions. I had nothing more to add. Isaiah handed out copies of the recordings and photos. That night, the hashtags changed. The day before, people had called me a manipulative old woman. Now it was Ash Justice for Jake and Sa and Grandma Hero. Messages poured in, offers of help, and stories from people who had been through something similar. I sat in my living room while Jake dozed beside me, his head on my lap. And I realized we had taken the first real step toward showing him that the world could still be a safe place. 3 months passed since that night I took Jake away from Tom's house. 3 months that turned both our lives upside down. Tom's house stood empty. After the press conference, the bank moved forward with repossession, just as I'd warned. Candace packed up and left for her sisters in another state, taking Michael and Trevor with her. Tom stayed behind, alone. He called, texted, even came by a few times, but I told him the same thing every time. First, prove you can be a father. Jake still sometimes woke in the night, whimpering softly, but the frozen terror in his eyes was gone. He started speaking up more, asking questions, laughing, real bright laughter I hadn't heard from him in years. I signed him up for an art class. At his very first exhibit, he stood proudly by his painting, a big yellow sun over a large house with two figures on the porch holding hands. The caption underneath read, "I am home." I had to blink back tears. The city's child welfare office determined that Tom's household had been a toxic environment, and Jake would stay with me for now. For now is a slippery phrase, but I knew I'd do everything in my power to make it permanent. Sometimes I thought about Candace, wondering what made a person so cruel to another woman's child, but I always came back to the same conclusion. In her world, only her own mattered. Outsiders had to submit or disappear. I'd chosen a third option for Jake, to live free. As for Tom, I could see he was trying to change. Therapy sessions, calls just to ask how Jake was doing. But I couldn't hand my grandson back to him. Not yet. Once you've allowed someone to break a child, trust isn't rebuilt in weeks or months. It's a long road. One quiet evening, as we sipped cocoa and watched an old cartoon, Jake turned to me and said, "Grandma, thank you for coming that day." "Sweetheart, I'll always come," I said, stroking his hair. "Always." And right then, I knew the most important thing had already happened. He believed me. He believed he wasn't alone. Maybe I'd lost my son in the traditional sense. Maybe Tom would never be the boy I'd raised, but I'd saved my grandson. I'd preserved what was left of his childhood. I no longer felt guilty for breaking up the family. Because family isn't walls, or a shared last name, or framed photos on the mantle. Family is the people who will stand up for you, even if it means taking on the whole world. I chose myself. I chose Jake, and there was not a shred of doubt in that choice. Now, every morning, we eat breakfast together. He tells me his plans for the day, about new friends at school. I know there will still be hard talks and tough choices ahead, but one thing will never change. He'll always know there's someone by his side who will never turn away. And I finally found what I'd been searching for all along, respect for myself.